Welcome to the Fall 2018 UC Santa Barbara Innovator Stories Series, Episode 3. I'm John Greathouse, and you can follow me on Twitter at John Greathouse. Tonight's sponsor is Tapjoy. If you've ever played a game on a mobile phone, how many people in here have played a game on a mobile phone? All right, guess what? You've interacted with Tapjoy. You just didn't know it. Tapjoy works with advertisers and app developers. So they monetize games and other apps on the phone for developers, but they also help advertisers have a more engaging experience for smartphone users. So if you're an advertiser that wants to reach more smartphone users, you should be talking to Tapjoy. If you're an app developer and you want to make more money with your app, you should be talking to Tapjoy. And we really thank them for their support, because without their support, we wouldn't be able to bring this conversation to you. So thank you. Dafina Toncheva is here today with us. Dafina is a partner at US Venture Partners. She's been an institutional investor for nearly 10 years, and she focuses on emerging technologies in the enterprise space. She joined USVP in 2012, and since that time, she's invested in a number of companies, including one called Raken, where I'm also involved. I'm a board member and investor, and this is where I met her and realized just what an incredibly special person she is on many, many levels. Her work ethic, her insights, the value she brings to the company. And I was so honored when she agreed to come here. Her schedule is crazy, and she's really, really, really busy, but I'm just honored that she's going to come here and share her insights with us. She most recently served on the board of Previty, which is a company that was recently purchased by Imperva for $140 million. What's nice about that is not only is it a great win for the company, it's a great win for Dafina and also for USVP, because they were the lead investor and the largest shareholder. So prior to USVP, Dafina was with a venture fund called Tugboat Ventures. She joined them in 2010, and before that, she was with Venrock, where she led the first institutional investment in Cloudflare. Now, since that time, Cloudflare has gone on and really become one of the most successful internet security startups in Silicon Valley. So I think even back then, when Dafina was sort of new to the investing game, she was proving that she had a really good nose for good opportunities. Before she became an investor, she worked at Microsoft, and she contributed to a number of projects there, including MSN Live ID, as well as MS Office. And during her tenure there, she co-authored several key patents. She got her MBA from Stanford. I hadn't heard of it. And then she ended up getting her computer science degree, her undergraduate degree, graduating magna cum laude with a special focus on cryptography, efficient algorithms, and database systems from another school that I haven't heard of. I think it's in Boston. It's called Harvard. Let's welcome Dafina to our class. And I really do know your schedule, and it's crazy, and I'm so happy. And Dafina is one of those people that when I asked her a while ago, but when I asked you, you were instantly yes.
Oh, yeah,
you weren't like,
awesome.
well, who, what, when is it, how many people, what's going on? You were like, yes, I'll do it.
Oh, it's so fun. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, guys.
So I like to start at the beginning a little bit. And you're from Bulgaria.
Yes.
You grew up, or you spent time with your grandparents on their tobacco farm. And I know that at one point you said that some of the best lessons of life came to you from those days. So can you share with us a couple of those lessons? What are some things when you think back to your farm time that you still rely on?
Sure. First, I want to acknowledge that there's at least one Bulgarian person in the room.
Is there?
Yes.
Oh, you guys already connected? Is that like a thing? Like, hey,
it says Bulgaria on his T-shirt.
Oh, you're kidding!
In Cyrillic. So I'm probably the only other person in the room that can actually read and understand what it says.
Did you wear that on purpose? Oh, okay. No, you should have been cool and been like, nah, man.
It's what we do.
Is he stalking you? Do we need security? Or?
Again, thank you so much for having me, for being here. I know it's late. You probably have homeworks to write. And I know this is a mandatory class, but still, thank you for being here.
Oh, come on.
People ask me where I'm from. And I've lived for 20 years in the US. So I always say, I'm from the US, but if you're asking about the accent is from Bulgaria. Because I think of myself as an American.
Right.
So much of my formative years, so many of my formative years were spent here. But I was born in a communist country, and I spent my teenage years in a country that was trying to transform itself into a capitalist country, and it went through a lot of economic and social turmoil in the process. When I was born, my grandparents made a living by raising tobacco, having a tobacco farm, and they did that for the first 14 years or so, 13 years of my life. My parents were doctors, and when I was born, they were in medical school, so I spent most of my childhood with my grandparents on the tobacco farm. And I think of that time as a really important one for my personal development because, first of all, I don't know if any of you are familiar with what it takes to grow tobacco, but it is one of the most labor-intensive farming there is. And especially in Bulgaria, with no agricultural tools, it was all done by hand. So I was 5 years old, and we would get up at 4 in the morning before the sun is too hot, before the day is too hot. We would go on the farm, we will water the tobacco, we'll pick the leaves that are ready to be picked so that we can set them up to dry. We would spend the rest of the day putting the tobacco leaves on long threads and hanging them to dry. Then in the winter, we would package the dried leaves and sell them to the tobacco companies to make tobacco out of it. And so I remember my hands being covered in tar because for any of you who has touched tobacco leaves, it leaves this really nasty black material on your hands that's very difficult to take out. And the only way you take it out is by rubbing your hands on a stone, on a rough surface, so that you can take the tar out of your hands. It tears the skin and creates little sores that last the whole summer while you're working the tobacco fields. And I remember my grandmother used to say this almost daily. She used to say, you see how awful it is to make a living with your hands. If you don't want to make a living with your hands, you have to invest in your brain. You have to study so that you can make a living in an easier way. Oh my God, you guys are taking notes. So I...
you hit a chord there.
So I was 5 or 6. I barely remember anything else from that time other than that it was very unpleasant and that instead of playing with the other kids, we did that all day long, all summer long. And all I could think about is I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing that. But the other thing that it taught me, so that was like how I don't want to spend the rest of my life. But other lessons from that time that were important to me were strong work ethic. You know, if you kind of have to get some things done. You have to get up at 4, whether you like it or not. Someone has to work the land, so you got to get up at 4 a.m. And you're going to stay for as long as you have to at night until you go through every single tobacco leaf. Discipline, persistence, perseverance. I think those are skills that character traits that not only did I learn as I was growing up with my grandparents, but also were instilled in me from my parents, who really valued strong work ethic along with good education. So those became the building blocks of the moral code in my family.
So help us understand how you went from the tobacco farm, Bulgaria,
To the States.
came to America, and I know you've told the story before, but I haven't heard the whole story, and I know the part I did hear was fantastic. Just how did that come about? And your English wasn't
very good
because you
It
didn't
still
live
isn't.
here. No, I think it's okay.
Let's be honest.
but of course, because you hadn't lived here yet. So you get into Harvard. Give us a little bit of color.
I was very lucky. As I said, my parents really instilled in me a strong work ethic and appreciation for good education. So they were pushing me, encouraging me to study hard, have good grades, pursue knowledge. Yet at the same time, both of them being doctors, they had invested a lot of their own time becoming experts in their fields. And we were still barely making ends meet. So the economic incentives in Bulgaria at that time just didn't align with the values that my parents wanted me to have and hold dear. So I was thinking, I will work hard, I'll study hard, I'll maybe become a doctor, and then I'll struggle like my parents do to raise my family. So the two things just didn't make sense. Around that time, my mother would kill me if she knew I was sharing this story, especially now
Hopefully
that this will live forever on the internet. I was 15 years old, and I was so frustrated that our life was just not getting better as a family that I told my mom, why don't you start a business? Now everybody's starting a business. That was during the time when Bulgaria was no longer a communist country. And she said, what are you talking about? I'm a doctor. The only thing I can do is to be a doctor. And healthcare in Bulgaria at that time was part of the government. The government owned it. It was public. It was a socialist healthcare system, and still is. And so I thought, well, I'll start a business then. And my parents sort of rolled their eyes, and they said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I will start roasting. I'll start buying raw peanuts, because my hometown was surrounded by peanut farms. And I said, I will roast them, I'll package them in 100-gram packages, and I'll resell them through wholesale retailers to resellers to restaurants, because in Bulgaria, peanuts are an appetizer. They're eaten with alcohol, and Bulgarians consume a lot of alcohol, so they consume a lot of peanuts with the alcohol. And I thought, restaurants make money on the alcohol, but they don't make money on the peanuts, and it takes up a lot of time for the chefs to do that, to roast peanuts. So I'm just gonna, start doing that. My parents were like, no way, like this is so embarrassing. The daughter of two doctors is gonna go do that. So I convinced my dad to drive me to the local peanut farm, and he hid. He dropped me off about 3 blocks away so that nobody would recognize him, that he's the dad of this 14, 15-year-old that is negotiating with an old woman selling raw peanuts. So I bought with my savings, I bought my first 10 kilograms of peanuts. I went home, I roasted them, I packaged them, and I left them in a big Costco-like store that one of my friends' dads owned. In 2 days, they called me and they said, "Bring more if you have." Of course, they did me a favor. They never kept any of the profits. They thought, hey, they're doing a favor to a friend of their son's. But I started making real money, so much so that it became a real enterprise. I had to start paying for my dad's gas, for the electricity, I even paid my 6 years old younger than me brother to help me pack the peanuts in packages. And so I started making more money than my parents. Now, 2 doctors that had spent 20 years of their lives studying to be, my mother was a surgeon, ear, nose, and throat surgeon. She did facial reconstructive surgeries. My dad was a neurologist, and I, at 15, selling peanuts, was making more money than them. That was wrong, right? Like, any way you look at it, that wasn't right. And that, to me, I think, was the time when I decided Bulgaria at that time wasn't for me. Like, I had to look for opportunities elsewhere because I wanted the effort I was putting in to pay off. And I looked for me being in a place like the US was the ultimate dream. I thought of it as the land of opportunities, and that was at first the impetus for coming here. It wasn't very easy because I didn't know how to apply. I did not know many people at that time who had applied to schools in the US. I didn't know how to do it. So it was a long process, but essentially I went to the US Embassy. I asked them how I can apply. They said, well, look at this Barron's book that we have of an index of all the schools in the US. So I went through that book and one by one picked every single university that gave any form of financial aid to international students. I wrote down the addresses of 100 schools and I sent letters, handwritten letters to all of them saying, do you give financial aid to foreigners and how? And if so, tell me how I can apply to your school. All of them responded and told me I had to take the SAT. Well, I didn't know how or where or what the SAT was. So I went back to the US Embassy. They gave me this another old book, a Barron's book that was as old as I was at that time, 20-year-old book with 7 practice tests. And they said, well, that's the SAT book. I snuck out the book, photocopied it in one afternoon, put it back in the library of the consulate, and went back home and started studying English. I read Charles Dickens. I read old copies of Newsweek. I read anything in English that I could put my hands on. I was in an English language school, but it's different when you study English as a second language. How many of you study some language as a second language? Can you imagine going to an SAT and taking the SAT in that language?
Merci.
It's very different, exactly. Merci beaucoup, exactly. And so I started preparing, and I rationed my 7 tests so that I can track progress. And I had this one shot of taking the SAT because it was very expensive, and it was only administered 2 or 3 times a year. I went and I took the test. I did very well. I was very happy with my result. I had 800 on math and 780 on verbal.
Stop bragging.
Just to give you an example of how hard I worked, I wanted it so bad to come here. And I applied to 50 schools. I asked every single one of them to waive the application fee because I couldn't afford it. Except every school except for 2.
You can name them.
Honored Stanford and UPenn. And they did not want to honor the request for waiving the application fee.
Look what they missed out on.
There you go. Well, I did end up going to Stanford, but afterwards, you're right.
Oh, that's true.
So what happened was, so I applied, and I was very lucky. I got into 12 schools on full scholarship.
Wow.
I ended up going to Harvard because it was the one school I had heard the most about. And it was incredible. My parents had never been outside of Bulgaria. My grandparents had never been outside of Bulgaria. When I told my parents I want to go to the US, it was exactly the same as if I had told them I'm going to be building a rocket ship in the backyard and going to the moon. It was exactly as likely in their heads that this was going to happen. It felt so foreign, so far away. It felt like a different world, different planet, because of how small and closed society in Bulgaria was. So in '98, I came to Boston and started studies at Harvard.
I told you guys it was a great story. So 20 years later, how do your parents, I mean, obviously a lot has transpired. Do they have an idea of what you do? Like, is it still like just this distant land, or?
So when I graduated college, I convinced my parents to move here as well.
Oh.
And by convinced, I mean I applied without them knowing for a green card for them. Because I knew if I told them I was going to do that, they would say no. So I secretly filled out the application forms for Canada, though, because in Canada, the immigration process is a point system, whereas in the US, it's a lottery-based system. And I knew that in Canada, the likelihood is high of them getting in. My parents are very young. So at the time, when I was graduating college, my parents were 41 years old. They were, so once they got invited to the consulate for an interview, I told them about it. And they were pretty shocked. And my dad, both of them were very predictable. My dad said no. My mom was interested and intrigued. They took some time to fight it over and agreed to do it, to go to the interview. They got turned down. They got turned down because in Canada, the doctor unions are very powerful. And even though there is a huge demand for doctors, there's not enough doctors to cover the land, to cover all the needs. Canadian unions, doctor unions, do not want to accept immigrants who are doctors in order to keep in order to keep away competition. So my parents were turned down because the officers didn't believe that they wouldn't practice medicine. So I was 22, 21 at the time. I had to hire a law firm, a Canadian law firm, to fight on behalf of my parents, to fight the decision of the Canadian consulate. We fought it successfully, and after another year, my parents got a Canadian green cards, and they moved right when I graduated college. They moved to Vancouver, Canada, and because I was at that time, I had just graduated, and I was going to work for Microsoft in Seattle, and Vancouver and Seattle were just a couple of hours away.
Yep.
When so my parents now live here. They've been living here for 15 years. They're Canadian citizens. They're very happy with their life in Canada. They still don't quite understand what I do for a living. In fact, when I graduated business school and I told my mom what I'm going to do, she said, "What is that?" And I said, it's investing capital in startups, investing money in small businesses that then grow to be big businesses, but it's very risky because not all businesses are successful. She said, "Well, so who do you work with?" And I said, "Well, most of the people I work with are old men." And my mom said, oh my God, you will never get married.
Oh no.
That was her biggest fear, was that somehow I will never get married, because here I was working with men that were my dad's age. So that was the level of, I guess, pride that she experienced in that particular moment in time. My grandmother, who's still alive in Bulgaria, doesn't appreciate at all. Doesn't understand what my job entails, and we almost never talk about it. But she's very proud of me. I go back to Bulgaria once a year, and I usually participate at a tech conference there.
Right, I was going to ask you about that.
And so I've been in the local media, on national TV, giving interviews. And so my grandmother says that she doesn't even understand half the things I say. I speak in Bulgarian, by the way, there. So she understands the language, she doesn't understand the concepts. But she says that she watches it every time, she records it, and then she replays it over and over again, because she says it warms her heart and it makes her feel so good about being a good parent, because she, in many ways, in the early days of my life, was my primary parent, a caregiver. So I think my relatives have a different level of understanding, but they all share a sense of pride, I hope, in how far we've all come as a family.
Yeah, well, they should. So add this to her viewing list and have Google Translate at the bottom, or YouTube Translate,
Exactly.
and she'll be completely confused because it will be so wrong. But at least she'll see you up on another stage.
Exactly,
and
on another TV.
Yeah, it'll warm her heart. So I was going to mention that I know that you've given a number of talks in Bulgaria, and I love the way they respond to you. It warms my heart. It must be rewarding for you to kind of be a bridge between the two cultures, between the two countries. Can you give us just a quick maybe snapshot of what your view of, like, where is the Bulgarian startup scene right now? Is it 20 years ago where we were, or is it completely different? Or because so many like really talented tech people live in Bulgaria, right? And for so many years, many U.S. companies have been using that tech talent. When I'm wondering, when are they going to start just saying, "Hey, I'm not going to be an outsourced tech team anymore. I'm going to do this myself."
Eastern Europe in general has been a good source of engineering talent. Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Ukraine, Russia have a very strong technical talent. And unfortunately, in many of these countries, because of their past history, again, capitalism is a relatively new concept. Most businesses in Bulgaria until 20 years ago were owned by the government. Private individuals did not run or own businesses. And so if you think about it, the biggest problem with that is that the skills that are required, the business skills that are required to start and grow a successful company, marketing, sales, business development, strategy, those skills still lack in that region. And it's going to take a while, like all ecosystems, it's going to take a while for those skills to develop. And I think for a long period of time, Bulgaria and the region will still be a good place to outsource engineering work, but it will take a while to build companies. That being said, we just recently had our first kind of big exit in Bulgaria, a company called Telerik that was bootstrapped by a couple of guys, 4 guys who are now friends of mine, sold for $300 million, which for Bulgaria was huge. And so those 4 guys, when they cashed out, they started investing their own capital in Bulgarian startups and started forming venture firms. They also developed an academy to coach Bulgarian students how to be successful tech entrepreneurs and engineers. So I'm excited for the region. I try to go back once or twice a year and contribute in any way I can. But this is my home.
Yep. So I mean, that's how it works. Right? Even in Santa Barbara, we had to have a few really big winners, and then they act like dandelions. All those seeds go all over the community, and also just the fact that people know somebody who made money at a startup. Just breaking through that instead of, startups, that's what they do. That's what crazy people do. Yeah. But to actually say, no, my neighbor was early at this company and they did well. So it's happening in Bulgaria.
Yes, exactly. No, exactly. There's a couple of other companies now that are breaking out. And
Do you think you'll ever invest over there? Is it something that, I mean, you're in kind of a unique position to be able to understand the culture, understand the language, and be a top investor.
The USVP strategy is very geographically focused on the US. So if I ever make investments, it would be on a personal level, probably not at this time on a professional level.
Timing's not right, but
that's right.
But maybe the market, as the market matures,
who knows? Yeah,
timing might be right for you. I'm going to have to stop and let a student ask a question, or I'll just keep going. Let's take the first student's question.
What first attracted you to computer science, and how has it inspired your career investing in software as a service applications?
Thank you for the question. I will probably disappoint you with my answer, but it's still a good question. When I came to the US, and I shared that with some students a couple hours ago, but when I came to the US, my number one goal, and maybe some of you can relate to that, my number one goal was survival. How can I find a way to build a life here, to stay here, to find a job here? I didn't have the kind of the liberty to pick whatever really resonated with me. So when I came to the US in '98, the demand for technical talent, technology talent for software engineers was really high. I was pretty strong in math and sciences. I had never owned a computer when I moved here. I had never programmed in my life. But I thought, hey, how much harder can it be than solving math problems? So I bought a computer and I took my first computer science class because I thought 4 years later when I graduate, it would help me get a job easily. So it was a very pragmatic decision. It was a combination of what's needed in the market, what the market wants, and also what my skill set is, and kind of the overlap of those two was how I made the decision. Again, it was a very pragmatic way to look at it, but it served me well. It was very difficult. Studying computer science was very difficult. The majority of my classmates were years ahead of me, literally. They had owned the computer at that time for 10 years already. They had programmed. Many of them had won competitions, computer science competitions, and I had no idea how to even turn on a computer. So it was very difficult, and at times it was humbling. At times really overwhelming and crushing to have to compete with people who were just so much better and had so much more advantage. But I kind of stuck with it. The first year was by far the hardest. I stuck with it, and over time it got easier. Now, the interesting part is that I graduated in 2002, and that was when the tech bubble burst, so nobody was looking for engineers. So my timing was a little off. I ended up still getting a job as a software developer at Microsoft. And over time, I think that when you put a lot of effort into something, you usually, not always, but you usually start liking it, even if you really didn't care for it as much to begin with. The hard work, the effort you put in, and seeing it starting to pay off, it somehow endears you to the project, and inevitably you build, maybe not a passion, but you build a love for it. I think that's true for all relationships, by the way. You put work in and you get something out. So it's true for my professional relationship with my subject, with computer science, with technology. I still think that there are people who are much, much better, but I'm good enough to compete.
And what you did well. So, I mean, obviously hard work will only get you so far. So you had the talent and the passion. As you say, you developed, maybe not passion, but you developed a liking for it over time, which is great. And now in your current role, having that basis, I mean, you're not writing code, but working with tech companies and being at that oversight role, you have an advantage I don't have. I don't have that technical background, and I rely on you.
But you have the operating background and the business background.
Well, that's why we're
well
all
together.
on the board.
Yes.
That's why it works that way. So anyone who's ever watched this series knows that I love to talk about mentors. It's hugely important for this audience. It's hugely important for the people watching this online. Talk to us about mentors in your life, what they did or didn't do for you, and then what kind of the role you played with the mentor back when you were a mentee. Like how did those relationships play out?
I spent some time with a few of you earlier today, and we talked about that a little bit. I think mentors are very important. It's kind of one of those sources of hopefully free learning and invaluable learning based on other people's experience and knowledge, usually people who have gone through the same path and have faced similar issues and already have many of the answers. So we can skip some of the mistakes in life by stepping kind of on their shoulders. Sure. But I think it's very difficult to find mentors. At least I found it hard to find mentors. Not because there aren't people who are worthy of being mentors. I'm surrounded by incredibly smart people. But in practice, it's really hard to pick someone and say, hey, do you want to be my mentor? Well, they have their life. They're probably very busy. They probably have a lot of other commitments. And so how do you build this kind of relationship where you see them on a regular basis and you learn on a regular basis? It almost feels like school, right? But school in a way is very unusual. It's not how real life works. You just go every day and you get the lesson and you go home and you do the homework and you submit it, and the teacher checks whether you've learned the lesson. In real life, things happen a lot more spontaneously and they're less planned. So the way I've noticed that for me it has worked best, and I continue to use this as in my job, is in almost every circumstance throughout my professional life, I pick people from the ones that I'm surrounded by that I think I can learn certain things from, and I look for those things. For example, I go on boards. I'm on 7 boards or 8 boards. Many of the people that I'm on boards with are significantly more experienced than me, and they have their own unique strengths. And so I watch these people in the boards, and their situations inevitably arise, discussions that we have, observations they make. And I just pick 1 or 2 things that stand out for me during that board meeting, during that interaction, and I try to remember it and use it. I also think that, so in a way, it's a very organic way of enlisting mentors without them even knowing, just by watching them, observing them, interacting with them. Then there are the very few, the 1 or 2 that have been prior bosses of mine, and I just stay in touch with. And if I have a hard problem to solve, I send them an email and I say, hey, there's something that I'm struggling with, give me advice. Like, how would you approach it? These are my advisors, and they're also mentors in a way. But I think that this everyday life learnings that we can steal from people who are more experienced than us, older than us, is really, for me, has been one of the best way to learn, because these are gifts that they're not even aware that they're giving you if you choose to take them. In my partnership, there are some of my partners are very experienced, and I see how they interact with their companies and the other partners, and observations they make at board meetings. My parents as well, occasionally. They still have things to teach me, even though our lives are so different. So that's how I've approached it, mm-hmm. And I think I found that to be the most reliable way of learning. Is right. When you don't commit the other person to teach you, you just find ways to be in their presence and kind of steal from
right,
them almost.
Right. But be mindful and be learning. Be in active learning mode.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Looking for the lesson. Yeah.
And most of us just want to talk and have, right? And being mindful and listening is huge. So, do you have a point of view on women having a female mentor? Do you think that's important, or seeking a male mentor so that they can understand that world? Or do you have a point of view on that?
I mean, I think that I think that it's probably easier to envision success if you see someone who looks very much like you, either has the same background as you, or looks like you, or same gender, the same similar parents, ethnicity. I think the more someone looks like us, the more we can envision their success being also our success. And in that way, I think it probably helps the most. But I think, and because of that shared background, their challenges might be similar to ours, which can also help with these lessons, right? Having similar experiences and drawing from their experiences and the lessons there. That being said, I think in general, most of my mentors actually have been men, and I'm very thankful for all of them. I just didn't find myself in a position, I guess, where I had many female mentors to draw from.
Right.
It's still, my industry is still one that doesn't have a lot of a lot of women.
Right.
And
right.
that was true also for software engineering back when I was at Microsoft. So, and before that at Harvard, when I was studying computer science there was only, I don't know, 20, 30, maybe 40 students at most that were studying computer science. Now I hear it's like 500 of the incoming class wants to declare computer science as their major. But at the time when I was studying computer science, it was just very few students.
And how many women?
I don't know, maybe 10%, 15% of all students were women. So I just learned to work with my classmates, regardless of the gender or their backgrounds, where they were from, and we just shared common misery in like doing our homeworks all night long, pulling all-nighters in the computer science center, and that's how we bonded.
Right. So at one point you said that you have the best job in the world. You might have said that in Bulgaria, I'm not sure, but I know that you said it.
And things were probably going well then when I said it.
You just had a great board meeting.
Exactly.
So I'd love for you to talk about what you enjoy the most, but also what's less fun. Because, I mean, a lot of people from the outside looking in, I wrote a blog entry, How to Become a VC, and it's been read a gazillion times, which shocks me that many people would want to become a VC, right? So let's talk about the good, but also let's talk about some of the bummer sort of downside of being a VC.
For me, the best part of the job is the opportunity to work with very smart people and work on many different projects at the same time. As an investor, I get to sit on several boards, 5, 7, 10, 12. Each company has its own challenges, but also they have many shared challenges. So it's really an interesting experience where I get to work on all of these businesses at the same time and see them develop at their own pace. Learn from that and cross-pollinate, share the knowledge across the portfolio. Now, I also enjoy my day-to-day work, which is meeting a lot of other startups that not all of them that I can back or would be interested in backing, but many of these people share passion for what they're building, incredibly deep insight into the area that they've chosen to dedicate their time and effort in. And so I find that almost always I learn something from them. And plus, passion is contagious. It just makes you excited to listen to that person's story and why they think they'll be successful and what the opportunity is. So that's all the enjoyable part of the job. The part that the parts that I struggle with is the statistics in early stage venture capital are somewhat disheartening. About a third of the companies that one invests in will fail completely. There'll be a write-off, a zero. About a third will return just about the amount of capital that was deployed in them. And it's that last 1/3 that will drive all the returns in the portfolio. So if you are a venture capitalist, early stage venture capitalist, and you invest in 10 companies, you know that statistically speaking, a third will die, a third will just get you your money back, and you just have to hope that that last 1/3 hits it out of the ballpark to make up for the other 2/3. Now, the numbers are not in your favor, right? It's pretty, it's tough to even think of it in those terms, but you also still have to build a portfolio knowing that those are the odds. So thinking about how to construct a portfolio with the best chance of success is really important. And even when I know that those are the statistics, it still hurts. And it's still incredibly stressful and painful to shut down a company, to write off an investment.
That's the worst.
Because many of the investors in our fund are, they're pension funds, they're nonprofits, they're people who gave us their money believing in us to make more for them, not less, or the same amount of money that they gave us. So I always think about them as well. I think, oh, wow, I'm disappointing my investor. They gave us 30 million, they gave us, in all, they have given us 300. Our fund size is 300 million. And I think, will we collectively, my partnership, be able to give them the kind of returns that make them want to come back and be happy with us and be proud of us. So that's very tough. Writing off a company is very difficult. It's incredibly stressful. I've lost so many, I've had so many sleepless nights worrying about that. The other thing that's really hard is that it's a job where you have a lot of a lot of influence, but almost no authority. I mean, I guess you have an authority as being a board member, being part of the governance body of the company. But really, all you can do in terms of action, the only thing a board does is hire and fire the CEO. Everything else, every other decision in the company, you can give advice about, you can advise, you can consult, but ultimately it's someone else's decision and it's someone else's execution. And that can be really tough, because if you're sitting on the outside and you're watching someone do it and you think you can do it better, whether you're right or not, doesn't matter, but if you think you can do it better, but your hands are tied, and the only thing you have is just the influence of the kind of trust you've built, the relationship, to convince the person, it can be at times challenging and frustrating.
Sure.
And sometimes you just also have to accept that people will walk their path and make their mistakes and learn from them. And no matter how much you force it, you just have to allow them to make mistakes and hopefully learn from them as quickly as possible.
But I think it goes back to, I mean, I completely agree. It goes back to what you said earlier about picking the investor in both ways, like you picking the entrepreneur and the investor, and
That's
the
right.
entrepreneur picking you, because you are going to have those, there's just going to be difficult conversations.
Yes.
And whether somebody wants to engage and really evaluate what you have to say, and we still want them to make their own decisions. I mean,
That's right.
the day that we don't want an executive to make their own decision is the day we should ask them to leave. So you want them to make their own decision, but you're right, it is a little bit frustrating sometimes when, especially if it's something where you've seen it before, you've done it before, you're pretty convinced that the outcome's going to be what it is, and then it is that outcome.
Exactly.
And I agree with you. And I would add, for me, the most frustrating aspect was saying no to so many people. I mean, you'll do a couple investments a year. You talk to, or you at least get exposed to maybe 1,000 companies. And I would always fall in love with the pitch and their idea, and it's like, I love it. And then I could say yes to one or two in a year.
I would like to add one more to the list of the challenges. I think on the outside, venture capital looks really glamorous. You get to sit on boards,
Right.
You represent a lot of money, capital. It looks and feels like a very prestigious job.
Isn't it like Shark Tank?
Exactly. Someone else asked me about that today. I don't watch Shark Tank,
It's
but
not like Shark Tank.
but it's nothing like it is from what I've heard about it. It's actually there's almost nothing glamorous about it, I'll tell you. It's a sales job in many ways. It's because all of us investors, we sell one thing. We sell money, right? We sell our money for the equity in your company. And when there's a lot of money out there, as it is the case today, when there's money one can take from a bank, from a wealthy friend, from wealthy parents, from a family office or another institution, and all money is the same, it's very difficult to win an investment opportunity that others want as well. And that's where the personal brand and other other things that an investor offers start to matter. But it's an incredibly competitive business with many smart people in it, with a lot of capital, and it's getting harder and harder to win investment opportunities and win them at the kind of price where you will drive the return for your investors that they expect from you.
Right. Absolutely. Agree 100%. Let's take a couple more student questions.
How do you see software companies advancing in the future, and how have you played a role towards that advancement?
That's a difficult question, very broad. I think I'll tell you about my role. I think about it a lot, especially since I just described how little impact we can have, direct impact. I think one of the things that I'm proud of is that the companies that I invest in subsequently create job opportunities for developers, for business people. So the jobs created is a very quick direct impact. The companies that USVP invests in, additionally, many of them are life sciences companies. They're companies that fight cancer therapeutics. That is another feel-good element of my job as it relates to my firm. The way in which I think I advance, or at least help the companies is, as I said, by taking the best practices of all the companies that I work with and that I'm exposed to. Many of them I don't work with all the time. USBP has 70 companies, active companies in the portfolio that we review regularly on a quarterly basis, and we learn from each of them what they do really well and where they struggle. And I take all these lessons and I can spread them across the companies that I work with. That's another way in which I like to think that I help. I am happy to be an investor and a woman. I think that that can help more women join the field. I see that because I speak to students like you. I speak to focus groups of specifically women who are interested in STEM, but are not sure that it's for them, doubt themselves, question themselves. And so having the opportunity to talk to them and show them that if I have been able to do it, you can do it too. And then later hear that at least some of them chose to pursue their dream of being a software engineer or working for a startup is another way in which I like to think that I can that I can help those companies. I think software companies can still benefit from diversity. I think, by the way, that's true for almost any project, any company, software or other. And by diversity, I don't mean just gender diversity, but any kind of diversity. I think that we all need different points of view, and the more diverse the points of view in the room, the more likely it is that we'll get to an interesting and a better answer. So these are some of the ways.
Let's talk about diversity, because we still have a tech problem with regard to diversity. I've had a lot of fun writing an article about Sam Phillips. So Sam Phillips started Sun Records. And one thing that Sam Phillips did was he literally had an open door policy. So he had a little recording studio in Memphis, and if you wanted to walk in his doors, you had to get there, but if you were able to walk in his door, he would listen to you. He would give you 5 seconds if you were terrible, and he would give you a recording contract if you were fantastic. And if you haven't heard of Sam Phillips, you might have heard of some of the people he discovered. B.B. King, Elvis Presley, I'm not sure you've heard of him. Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Ike Turner, Johnny Cash, and there's more. I've always thought if we could, that's an ideal, right? Because it's hard to pull that off. But if we could do that, as venture capitalists, if we could literally listen to anyone and be kind, but be quick with the negative feedback, like, this isn't for me, it's not. I just think there's so many undiscovered Jerry Lee Lewis entrepreneurs out there that just never get a chance to meet you. They never get a chance to meet me. Every blog, including mine, said, how do you get an investment from a venture capitalist? Get a referral. Well, that's a wonderful shortcut, but what if you don't know anybody that knows John or Dafina? And so it results in a lack of diversity. So this is a rambling lack of a question here, but I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on what we can do to increase the top of the funnel so that we can have just look at more deals? And was there ever anything that a company or an entrepreneur did that wasn't a referral from a trusted friend that got your attention that led you to have a conversation? So a bit of like an 8-part question. But
I read almost all of the cold emails that I receive.
Which is not the case for most people.
And I try to answer all of them.
Yeah,
It's usually, I mean, it's a short answer. I might say, hey, this is not an area of investment interest for my firm, but thank you for the consideration.
Yeah, right.
Several times I've responded to people who have asked for, especially students, if students reach out and ask for help, I would set aside 15, 20 minutes for a call. It's difficult. We're always, very busy, so it's difficult to carve out time for an infinite amount of questions, but it's also surprising that very few people do reach out.
Right.
And I think that that's a lesson for all of us, for me including. I think the only sure way to not get something is if you don't ask, if you don't try. I'm surprised and happy when I hear or read an email from a student that just is just sending it out of the blue without cold outreach and explaining why they did that and what they're looking for. I would set aside some time and talk to them. I think that the topic of diversity is a really tough one, and I don't have a good way of.
There's no silver bullet.
Exactly. I think about Bulgaria. I think there it's 50-50. And I don't think Bulgaria is doing particularly a good job at encouraging women to study computer science or sciences in general. I just think that it always was part of the culture that because it was a poor country, everybody had to work. Women didn't have the families didn't have the luxury of having one of the family members stay home while the other worked and made enough money to cover all expenses. So everybody always had to work. And as I looked around all my friends, we were all equally poor, but everybody's parents, both parents worked, and they were engineers, they were doctors, they were in the military. So I think a little bit of it is cultural too, at least here in the States. I'm starting to appreciate that.
Well, it's kind of you to offer your time. What I typically do is I do try to respond to everyone. I feel like I at least owe them a response. And oftentimes it's not a fit, it's just not what I invest in. But I'll often say, hey, but if you want to send me a deck, I'm not your investor, but if you want to send me your deck, I'll give you quick feedback. And again, it's surprising most people don't do that, which is fine.
So I was in San Diego a few months ago, and I received a completely cold outreach email from a guy who said he lived in San Diego and he built a business, and he sent me his deck. I looked through the deck and I thought, well, the kid had done a good job. Like, he had grown his business from 0 to 3 million, and he didn't have any investors, and clearly he didn't have a board. Like, it was pretty clear from the deck that he did not know much about venture capital, didn't have exposure to that startup ecosystem, yet he had done something right. So I met him in a coffee place downtown San Diego, and I said, hey, this is not going to be for you as VP, but let me give you advice on how I would approach it if I were you, and these are the resources that are available to you where you can go read and find more information. And 4 months later, he sent me another email, and he said that he found angel investors in San Diego, so I was pretty happy about that. But the other thing is, when I applied to the US, I didn't have a lot of information, and getting information was almost half the battle. And so I, in particular, am sensitive to that when I see someone else struggle with this lack of information, availability of resources. So it resonates with me, and it's an area where I try to be helpful. As soon as I got into school in the US, I bought SAT books and I sent them back to my hometown, to the
you should have sold them. Come
the
on,
local
man.
library, make some money. So, and I've been doing that since, just trying to find ways to expose Bulgarian students to U.S. schools and ways of getting exposure to education.
Well,
here.
you're very kind, and there's a couple good lessons there. One, a small act of kindness like that can really change somebody's life, and then two, the fact that that person took the time to close a loop with you.
Oh, it made
and
me
say,
feel really good, yeah.
That's what we get paid in, right?
That's
we
right.
get paid in that kind
the
of
goodwill you
acknowledgement.
generate, absolutely.
Yeah, and so just to take the time and say, hey, you probably don't remember me, Dafina, you met with me a while ago, but you know what? I ended up getting an investor, and and thank you for your help. That makes your day, right?
For sure.
Do you have any words of advice to young men going into the tech world, or young women, but mostly young men? Do you see things that they're doing that you wish you could just kind of take them aside and say, come on, like, be self-aware, don't do that. This is your chance.
I don't know. I mean, that's also another broad question. Someone asked me earlier what advice I would give them in how they pick their first job if they were going in tech, and it seemed like, and it seems like for most college graduates, the instinct is like, let me go in a small company that might one day make it big, and so I can make a lot of money. I think that's a fine strategy for later, like down the road. I think of your first job as as a continuation of your education. Picking a company that's already performing well, and more importantly than that, picking a boss from whom you can learn is more important than anything else. It's more important than the salary that you paid, the town, the city you're going to be in, where you're going to live. The most important thing is who you work for and the kind of lessons that person will teach you, because that is your building block for later on. That will define what the next job is. what swimming lane you end up in. It all depends on that first job. And I don't want to make it sound so important. It's okay to, if you make a mistake, it's fine, you can correct it. But I just don't think that at this time, most college graduates appreciate what is important in a job. I think money is important. I'm an investor, I'm a capitalist. I get measured by the amount of money I make for others and for myself. So I will not sit here and say money is not important and you shouldn't worry about it. But I think that in order to maximize long-term your earning potential and your potential as a professional, you need to think about how you invest in your career. Just like until now you've been thinking about what middle school you go to, or your parents thought about that for you, what high school you go to, what college you go to. Building a career is exactly the same thing. You need to have a coherent and compelling story being told by your resume of choices that make sense, that build on each other. Job A was number one, then job B built on job A and added these other skills, and then job C added to that. And then somewhere down the line, 10 years later, when you now have seen how things can be done successfully by others who are better than you and older than you and more experienced than you, now you can go into a small company and offer that, and you can be that guy or that woman that will teach someone from college how to do it. And it doesn't take that long, but you need to invest the first 10 years of your career in learning. Because what you learn in college, some of it translates, but most of it doesn't translate into your next job, into your first job. And so you have to think of that first job as another school, another college, another degree you're getting. And if you think of it that way, as an investment in your long-term career, chances are you'll make a better decision than if you just think about how much money you'll make, yep, or whether this company, maybe one day can make it really big, or if the location kind of works for you, things that are slightly less important.
So I stole a line from Mark Suster, who he probably stole it from someone else, and I completely agree with you. There's a time to learn and a time to earn, and right out of school, it's a time to learn. You're building that foundation that you're going to put the rest of your career on, and you'll make money down the road. So I'm with you again. So let's, last question. So USVP, you're there, you're not going anywhere. Any of the partners watching this, she's not going anywhere. But once that's played out, what are the mountains do you fantasize about climbing? Like what do you see down the road for you?
It's hard to imagine that, to envision what's after, because I think there's so much still that I need to do. There are so many challenges that need to be overcome and lessons to be learned that it's really difficult for me to imagine what that next thing will be. I know it will come to be eventually, but I think for the next 10 to 15 years I will continue to be an investor, and hopefully, if my firm would have me, and continue to help companies and learn with them, through them as well. And maybe the next phase of my career will be one where I hopefully give even more back, more of my experience, hopefully more of my wealth to younger people, yep, through teaching or other ways.
Yeah, I didn't want to lead the witness, but I was thinking you have that teaching gene. You would be.
You think?
I do. I think you would be a fantastic teacher. But you're busy now.
So.
I know you are. But speaking, inspiring people, maybe a book or two.
There you go.
I think that's.
I can't even imagine doing that.
I think that's in your future,
day.
but you're too busy to worry about that now. So thanks again for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.